Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge & Company. It's jobs, jobs, jobs. Creating and protecting them is the most vital and challenging issue we face today. Bob Master fiercely defends the rights and jobs of working men and women as the legislative and political director for the Communications Workers of America in New York, New Jersey, and New England, and he's my guest today. You were particularly loud on the during the strike on the line. And now everything's quiet. So although the workers are back, the union has not settled, right?
That's right.
And what's happening?
Well, there was a kind of a natural letdown after the strike.
Yeah.
When we went out, we said we were striking not to get a contract, but to get the company to just start bargaining in earnest, because from the time the bargaining started on June 22nd until expiration, they really hadn't moved at all. And they just had this attitude of, we're just going to talk you to death. And so we went out on strike. We sent them a strong message of what we could do, and now there's been some breaks and so on. One of the unions at the table, the IBEW, had to go to their convention for a little while, but bargaining is going to begin now in earnest. They've gotten off of some of their really bad demands, and we will see over the next several weeks what happens.
Their demands were what? The pensions? They wanted to.
They want to freeze pensions for existing employees, eliminate them for future workers. And if we could just stop on that, I mean, the notion there is that no matter how profitable the company is, no working person deserves a secure retirement anymore. This is a company that made $22.5 billion over the last 4.5 years.
And what does the chief executive make?
He made $18 million last year, and the top five guys, maybe there's a woman in there,
I hope.
top five, took home $258 million over the last 4 years.
And is that including the stock options and stuff that they get later?
Total that's compensation.
Total.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's one thing.
Pensions was huge. Cutting disability benefits, cutting paid sick leave, forcing workers to pay thousands of dollars for their medical. So it was a sweeping
and chintzy
attack.
Things like eliminating holidays.
Yes, and that's one of the things they've backed off on.
They've now was so dumb.
Yeah, they've now acknowledged that we can have Veterans Day and Martin Luther King's birthday
that's
off.
Great.
Yeah.
But so a company like that, its history, has it always been a problem? Have you always had problems with labor relations?
It's funny. We've always had an adversarial relationship, which is really unfortunate in a lot of ways, because the truth is that if we'd worked together, I think that it would be better for everybody concerned. But we have a history here going back to 1986, when they were divested from AT&T. Right. We had a strike in '86, we had a strike in '89, we had a strike in '98, we had a strike in 2000. So
it's a lot.
It's a lot, yeah.
The union was formed basically as telephone operators, wasn't it, or telephone workers in the old days?
Yes.
I see. Were they still plugging in the switchboard then?
They were still plugging in
I love
switchboard.
That. Yeah. And the women, did they help to organize it?
They did, absolutely.
So great.
Yeah.
So now you're discussing all these things, and you have a partner in it. It's you just said
the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers.
It was said though that when you took the recess from the strike, the break, that you had a very larger, bigger fund than they did to help your strikers. How do you do that? Explain a union, form.
We set aside a certain portion of the membership dues and just leave it sitting there, earning interest and, investments and so on, in the event of a strike, so that if our members are on strike, after the first 2 weeks, they get $200 a week. After the fourth week, they get $300 a week.
And so your union is nationwide.
Yes.
It started with the telephone operators and then telecommunications, but it's got a lot of different segments in it.
Yeah,
right? It's interesting.
We have been very active in organizing, and one of our biggest bargaining units now is our state worker unit in New Jersey. We're the largest public employee union in the state of New Jersey. We represent city workers, we represent healthcare workers, we represent a really diverse group.
Flight attendants.
We've had a number of mergers that brought in flight attendants, typographers, there are not too many of them left,
right.
Electrical workers, International Union of Electrical Workers, manufacturing workers at places like GE.
Is CWA known as one of the more aggressive unions?
It's known as one of the more innovative and progressive and activist unions. We have a real culture of trying to get our members involved, very democratic, a lot of membership involvement.
So the national union is divided into 8 sections of the country?
I don't know exactly how
Chapters.
many. Roughly.
What are they called?
Regions. Yeah.
Regions.
Right.
And then, so you work for #1 region.
District 1 is New York, New Jersey, New England. We're the largest region. We have the proudest history, we think, of militancy and willingness to fight and
Right.
innovative commitments to progressive politics, like what we're doing with the Working Families Party.
So then how does that, then what happens now when you have a national convention? I mean, how do you relate to the other regions? I'm so interested in how unions work, because I think most people don't understand.
Yeah, I think the thing that most people don't understand about unions is that they really are democratic organizations.
Yeah.
They really are responsive to the needs of their members. I mean, we represent about 150,000 working people in the Northeast, right? A total of about 600,000 nationally.
Right.
And our goal is to ensure that those members have good jobs with decent health care, decent retirement. And they're very concerned about that day to day, you know, and how they're treated on the job. And so that's what drives our organization. And we come together in conventions, and people from the different districts make decisions about what kinds of policies the union should pursue.
And then but you also can do things yourself.
Oh, yeah.
If you go on strike, you don't need to bring it to other people, or do you?
It really depends on the contract. I mean, the National Executive Board has to approve a strike. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So do you think that corporate greed is more now than it used to be? I mean,
Since
the country
when?
grew up with corporate greed.
What's your
right?
time frame for that?
Right. But the salaries, I mean, that's the thing that's made the biggest difference, is it? The discrepancy?
I think that you have a 35-year history now of
That takes us back
to the mid-'70s, late '70s, where there's been a shift, where American corporations have basically said, it's never enough. We have to have more profits. We have more competition internationally. The world's changed. I mean, in the post-war period, American corporations ruled the roost. There was very little international competition. In the '70s, things kind of broke down. You had a series of recessions. You had the oil crisis and so on. And they became much more aggressive. People don't realize this. The Business Roundtable, for example, dates back to 1975 or 1976, which was, you know, and in fact, Ivan Seidenberg, the CEO of Verizon, is the head of the Business Roundtable, right? And they have become increasingly aggressive, cutting taxes, cutting regulations, breaking unions. And that's been their program. And nationally. And globally, really. And it's intensified in this time period. And I think we're seeing a particularly intense period since the election of these Republican governors in 2010.
So, I mean, it's the fascinating direct contact with these guys with Washington and what happens with the legislation and the attitude of the government. Right? It's just,
but it's been going on for a long time. I mean, this is really Reaganism run amok, right? And when Reagan was president, he was constrained by a Democratic Congress. Right. When Gingrich took over in '94, you saw the full blossoming, obviously, Bush as president and so on. But the levels of inequality and the fact that you've destroyed the middle class, which you really have in this country. I mean, the top 1% has the same percentage of income in the country that they had in 1929, right? The disparities between rich and poor are greater than ever. And the argument is, if you let us run free, you cut taxes and you eliminate regulations, we'll create jobs. And now we have 25 million people who can't find full-time work.
So do you, the campaign finance laws and the financing of government has had a strong impact. And I read the other day, and I haven't really studied it, that the unions are finding loopholes in this new recent court decision.
Well, I don't think they're loopholes so much as taking advantage of.
I don't mean loopholes.
No, I know.
Taking advantage of the negative.
Taking advantage of the same openings that were provided by Citizens United that the corporations are taking advantage of. The truth of the matter is that we're always going to be outgunned by them.
In the '50s, what was union participation in the country? It's pretty high.
At the high point in 1955, 35% of workers in the private sector belonged to a union. And now it's under 7%. And it's about 12 or 13 overall. And that's why, by the way, in the last year, you've seen this all-out attack on the public sector, because public sector is still 35% organized. Right. In New York, like 65%. Right. So corporate America and the Republicans are saying, we got to put these people out of business as well, because they're the last big institutional bastion of support for the Democratic Party and for progressive politics.
So as they knock all these jobs, of course, they don't help the economy because you don't have people buying. Who is there to tell us that people will listen to? It must be very frustrating.
It's very frustrating. I think, to be honest, I think Obama missed a big teachable moment. I mean, I think that when he started talking about debt and deficits and said, I've got a better deficit plan, instead of saying, that's not the problem.
Right.
The problem is growth. And we actually, in this period, need to have the government be more active because they've got to replace the missing demand in the private sector. And now you've got worldwide austerity, and
It's worse.
all you're seeing is people's living standards go down, and it's not solving these shortfalls.
Now, but the decline in union participation can't only be the result of corporations, and can it be in that pressure?
There were
People-
there were structural changes in the economy,
Yeah,
right?
but,
I mean,
Studs Terkel used to talk about the working class.
Yeah.
But the working class is now the middle class, in a way.
I mean, you
And
know,
does that not make a difference in people's minds? Do some people not want to join a union because they don't think?
I think the truth of the matter is that people, when they're asked, do want to join a union. People who are not in the labor movement, not familiar with this, cannot really grasp the level of intense opposition and fear that the employers engender in these organizing situations. I mean, all they really have to do is pick out the one or two people who are leading the organizing and fire them.
Yeah.
There are minimal penalties, and people look and say, I can't take that risk, not in this economy.
Right.
And that's what they do. I mean, the level of intimidation, we routinely file petitions for representation with the NLRB with 70% of the people saying, I want to join a union. And by the time the election comes, it's 30 or 40 because people have been intimidated.
We did have a victory with the boathouse in Manhattan.
That was great.
That was.
great.
It
Yeah,
was a
and
terrific strike.
It was terrific.
And it got a lot of support, but it's, of course, Manhattan and New York.
Yeah, it's true. We have a different,
And the restaurant workers have always been, seems to me, managed to do that.
and that's a great union. The
Yeah,
HERE is
yeah.
a very active union,
Right.
very sophisticated.
But and the number of strikes is minimal now, isn't it?
Way, way down from where it was years ago, yeah.
It's you know, my frame of reference, because I'm so much older. So I remember in the 40s and 50s and all those labor union
Yeah,
leaders in,
yeah.
the 60s. And I mean, I was on the funeral train when Kennedy died, sitting with Walter Reuther, who was this hero in my mind.
Right.
And there's it's not in the atmosphere anymore.
Well, I think we have had a sustained attack
Yeah.
on unions and the notion, remember, what do unions represent in terms of values? They represent the notion
Right.
that people do better together.
Right. And the
Ask-
common good.
The common good, right?
Absolutely.
It's the same idea as government.
Yeah.
And
It's
we have
gone.
had 35 years
Yeah.
of, no, you're on your own. It's about individual achievement. It's about me getting ahead of you. So
That
there's
is.
there's
It's
been
that-
a real
it's
value
the whole
shift.
consumerism also.
Yep.
And it's not. It's very interesting. It's a whole terrible problem.
I
think, in the
believe
country.
I believe that there is an undercurrent. There's a backlash. What we saw, breaking out in Wisconsin, right, and in Ohio to some extent, and in our strike. I mean, when we went out on strike, we got so much support. People honking horns and
right.
unions reaching out and saying somebody is finally standing up against corporate
Yeah.
greed.
It's a very important thing, and I think I agree with you. But you're more pessimistic about politics than I am. I can't stand it.
Well, I worry about it. That's
Yeah.
why my job is to worry.
The Wisconsin thing was amazing.
It was fantastic.
In Ohio, when does that come up? An election day?
Yes.
And what's
Big
gonna happen
referendum.
there?
I think we're going to win.
Oh, good.
I think
that would be really stunning, wouldn't
that
it?
it would be fantastic.
Now, wouldn't that help in the presidential election?
I think it would. I think it would. But Obama's got to get out there and identify himself
Right.
with these battles of working people
Right.
for their fundamental rights.
Absolutely. So now, the other way of affecting it is through politics. And you were a co-founder of the Working Families Party in
Yep.
New York State.
Yep.
Explain it. It's another. You were very lucky, and I mean, you weren't very lucky. You worked very hard, and you got yourself enough votes to be on the line. And most of the voters who vote on your line are Democrats, right?
Yes, although it's a mix. I mean, we got a lot of votes upstate at this point. We get a lot of votes from people who I think identify with the idea of working families. Yeah.
Do you register is it possible to register as a voter as a member of the Working Families Party?
Yes, we have about 40,000 registrants. We don't put a huge emphasis on it because
You want
we
them in
know
the primary.
exactly,
Yeah.
and we're very active in
Right.
primaries.
So let's talk about the Working Family Parties. When did it start?
Started in 1998.
What started it? Why did you want to do it?
We started it because there was a real vacuum in the state. The Liberal Party, as David Dinkins has said many times, was neither liberal nor a party. It had become a patronage machine.
It was started by union people.
It was started by the Hatters Union, Alex Rose, and people
Right.
like that. It was a successor to or an alternative to, depending on your perspective, to the American Labor Party, right? Which
Right.
was
But it was interesting there too, and that's still we were talking about it before. The Liberal Party was formed because they didn't like communists, and they thought the ALP was communist, right? And nowadays, if you look on some of the blogs and some of the attacks on unions, of course, it's still the same old nonsense. You had a wonderful expression for that.
Anti-communism is outlaw
Right.
communism,
Yeah.
right? So, but so we saw the politics of the state drifting to the right. I mean, if you remember in the mid '90s, when Pataki gets elected, the assembly is kind of intimidated. They've got their own tax cut plan, and so here we are cutting taxes and cutting services. And we said, look, there's got to be an alternative. We can use the cross endorsement system, the so-called fusion voting system, which is quite unique in New York. It's common in a couple of other places, but in New York it's the most vigorous. We can use that to try to create a party that will put pressure on the Democrats to stay true to their principles. And that was the original concept. And the founding unions were really CWA, the auto workers of Ruther, so to speak,
Right.
some Teamster locals, the laborers, and some community organizations, Citizen Action, at that time
Right.
Acorn.
An acorn. And so you usually endorse, you don't always endorse your own candidate. I mean, you don't run your own candidate. You cross-endorse most of the time.
The vast majority of the time, we are
you've had a
endorsing
couple of
Democrats.
But it's such a vacuum because New York State doesn't really have a Democratic Party, nor does New York City. I mean, that's the part. Does it?
Well, the Democratic Party has really deteriorated. I mean, you have
Totally.
you have a legislative party made up of legislators who have legislative leadership. You have a fundraising party, which is really what it does, and the field operation has just kind of disappeared. But I think what we have found is that by having our own organization, by having a group of unions and community organizations and progressive individuals sitting around the table, we can formulate a strategy, fight for particular legislative objectives.
And you've had some major victories.
And some major victories.
What have they been?
I think the first one was raising the minimum wage
Right.
in 2004. We won a series of battles around living wage legislation at the county level.
And it permeates down.
It
Yeah.
does. I would say the biggest victory was in 2009, when the rest of the country was cutting back on social spending. We managed to win a significant increase on those who were, most able to pay, and raised income taxes. Not anywhere near what they used to be, but a little bit of a corrective to the inequality.
And what about some of the other states in the region? And, I mean, it's independent. It's not part of your official duties from the union, but what about other states? Do they have?
Connecticut has a
another-
very active Working Families Party that won a tremendous victory recently, passing the first paid sick days legislation, ensuring that every employer, I think larger than
Yes,
50,
right. Yeah.
it guarantees that every worker will have at least 5 paid sick days, so people don't have to choose between, being sick and keeping their jobs.
What happened in Connecticut? I just remembered now. It was a Democratic governor elected.
Yep.
I'm sure with your help.
And he won by 5,000 votes, and he got 25,000 votes on the Working Families Party line.
Great. Isn't
Yeah.
that something? So, and then he came up with a budget
Yep.
that was said to be quite reasonable.
Yep.
But then the unions didn't want it. Did they vote again?
It was a crazy.
Accepted it?
They have a crazy system. They had to have a certain number of unions and a certain percentage. So 60% of the people voted yes, but the contract was considered turned down because of the structure of their voting. So they changed it. It was ratified again.
And now you said that there were working parties across the country.
There's one in Oregon,
Yeah.
which they were the first state to re-legalize fusion. Fusion cross endorsement was everywhere in the late 19th century.
Right.
And then after William Jennings Bryan ran for president as a Democrat populist, it was made illegal almost everywhere. So Oregon re-legalized fusion. And we've got a little fledgling party in Vermont, one in South Carolina. But also exciting to us is we're now in conversation with a lot of not Working Families Party groups, but similar kinds of electoral coalitions, hoping to create a kind of national network of progressive electoral groups that can do kinds of similar things and hold Democrats and Republicans accountable.
And also, I assume, get in to protect collective bargaining.
Absolutely.
And stuff like that.
Yep.
Now, when they talk about a right-to-work state, what does that mean?
It means that you can't have a contract that requires a worker to join the union or to pay what's known as an agency fee, which is a kind of a similar fee. So people basically can get all the benefits that the union negotiates without paying anything to the union. So it undermines, it's designed to undermine the strength of the union.
It doesn't make any sense.
Well, it makes sense. It makes sense from the employer's point of view.
If you work in a place that's unionized, it's got a union, and the union negotiates, but you can plan to stay out of it, right? That's really interesting. That's the opposite of the card check. I mean,
in a sense. I mean, it goes back to Taft-Hartley in 1949, and
Is the card check still alive as far as unions go?
right now it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, not with the Republicans in control of the House. I mean, these guys are ruthless. I mean, they want to roll back everything.
So is there a planned, concerted effort to go back against some of these people who are so anti-labor in Congress, in the Senate and the House?
I think the entire labor movement across the country is looking to, pick off those people who have opposed us, in the House and the Senate. But I think we got a tough battle next year.
Yeah, why do you think that?
I just think the math on the Senate is not good. I think there are more Democratic seats that are up than Republican seats. And we've got some, don't ask me to name them, but we've got, I think, some impending retirements that are going to be problematic. So I think we've got a real challenge.
And we don't have some outrageous candidates to run against incumbents.
No. I mean, the most exciting thing, as we were talking about, is Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah.
I mean, I think she is really going to be a breath of fresh air and, someone who has enormous ability to talk very straightforwardly and very understandably about these issues.
And this is a terrible thing for me to say. Unfortunately, Scott Brown isn't at the extreme edge of the other party. That's too bad.
Well,
we could trade him for somebody else who's really bad.
He's from Massachusetts and he knows it, right? So even though he was a Tea Party darling when he ran, he's trimmed his sails because it's Massachusetts.
Is there any doubt that Labor's not going to support Obama?
There's no doubt.
No.
I mean, we will be doing everything we can because any one of these other guys is so bad. I mean, as disappointing as Obama's been, and he has been, he's so much better. There's no comparison between him and any of the Republicans.
What is, talk about labor education. I mean, one of my favorite things is civics is no longer taught in school. How do you approach young people? How do they learn about other than in history, the labor movement? Is there a campaign or interest in educating them to be more pro-labor?
I think that's very challenging. I mean, we in the union have to do a lot of education of our own members because young members come in, say to a company like Verizon, they don't make a choice. If they go to work at Verizon, they become members of the union. What do they know about the history? What do they know about the struggle? As far as they're concerned, they got a great job and the employer gave it to them. So it's a huge gap, I think, in our society and in our culture, and it's reflects the decline of the labor movement.
Do you have somebody that is an education person in the union? Do you run those kind of programs?
Yeah, we do a lot of that.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's such an important thing, and it's so gone down. That's what I can't understand.
Yeah.
As a young person, we used to get so involved in everything.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same as political participation also.
Look, I think you have a decline of the liberal political culture, right? I think that the dominant ideology, what we hear over and over again is, it's going to be the corporations that are, I mean, this whole notion that we can't tax the job creators, that we hear over and over again as the talking points from Boehner and people like that. Can't tax the rich people, they're creating the jobs. As opposed to saying, which we said in the 50s and the 60s, if middle class people have money, if working class people have money, they're going to go out and buy things and that creates jobs. We've turned the whole thing on its head.
But there are so many people that don't agree with that. I mean, when you talk to them, isn't raising taxes on rich people generally a populist issue that the majority of people support?
The majority of people do support it.
So then why aren't we, where are they?
I don't know. I mean, it's a really hard question, right? I mean, I think you have a big problem, which is the Republicans are unified. They're absolutely against it. They're catering to their base. That famous thing where Bush went to the big fundraiser with all the $1,000 a plate contributors, said, "You're my base."
Right.
He was very honest.
Right.
And the Democrats are divided because they're dependent on the money from a lot of these people also.
They're scared of it, yeah.
But I think it's shifting,
But
right?
there must be Republican voters who want to tax the rich.
They absolutely do.
Yeah.
But the problem is someone's got to fight for it, right? I think it's great now that Obama's fighting for it. I think that the Buffett thing, was a big deal, right? I mean, here he was saying, tax me. It's not fair.
It's a very interesting
And it
thing.
changes the discussion when somebody says something like that.
So the bottom line of all of our talk is that we're concerned about the future of us because of the kind of thinking that's going on. What is it?
I think that what we need, and we were talking a little bit about this, is we need people to be in the streets demanding the kinds of changes, demanding more fairness, demanding an end to inequality, demanding that they give giveaways to the banks. And I'm very encouraged, for example, about Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, who was really taking a great stand on this bank settlement and is getting tremendous support for it. And he's basically saying the emperor has no clothes. We're giving a $20 billion get-out-of-jail-free card to the entire financial industry, which crashed the world economy in 2008. We can do better. And so that kind of thing, I think, signifies maybe things are changing.
It's so interesting because that's the popular thing. I mean, if you stood up for, if more people stood up for principle and were outspoken and not afraid about their reelection,
Right.
and not afraid about who's giving them money, A, they wouldn't need that much money, and B, they would be very popular. So that's the overall atmosphere we're living in.
And the truth of the matter is, for Eric, right, this makes him a hero. I mean,
Exactly.
he'll raise tons of money online. It'll be great for him. you know?
Exactly, yeah. So we've come to the end of our discussion. I hope that the future is bright. I mean, you've got some of that optimism down there somewhere.
I absolutely
Yeah,
do.
and we're all watching to see what happens with the Verizon strike.
We
One
appreciate
question
it.
I didn't ask you, and
Yeah,
I want to do it very quickly. Why is the union is organized the landline operation, but why did the wireless? How is the wireless set up without the union? They set up a different company?
It's a separate company, and they have been viciously anti-union. We actually have 70 technicians at Wireless. And the other thing people should know is that in the traditional landline, we also represent the FiOS, which is the cutting-edge technology. But they were very anti-union.
That's outrageous.
It is.
Okay, with that outrage, thank you very much, Bob Master.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for this opportunity.
If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.